senior investigative reporter at Project Veritas. His mission is to expose corruption in government, media, big tech, politics, education, and beyond through undercover videos. Christian Hartsock has broken some of Project Veritas' biggest stories, exposing Clinton's campaign, secret operation to incite violence in Trump rallies, CNN contributor Ben Jones' real thought on the Russiagate Nothing Burger hoax, and the high-level Google executives' efforts to interfere with our election in 2020. In addition, while he was working with Andrew Breitbart, he exposed the Clarence Thomas lynchcom, fake signals, and noodle stories, reporting the treacherous zones from the Ferguson notes of Saddam Hussein. As chief investigative reporter for Project Veritas, he trains, recruits, and mentors undercover journalists. Let's welcome Christian Hartsock to tell us more.
What about now? Yeah. Is this good? Okay. I'm just gonna hold it. All right, well, it's great to be here with the Del Mar Seacoast Republican Women's Club. I don't know how many of you remember the Groucho Marx line from Annie Hall. I would never want to belong to a club that would have me as a member. That's why I love the Republican Women's Club. So, in next month will be the 60th anniversary of the greatest act of citizen journalism in the history of the country. Now, every single news outlet was assembled at Dealey Plaza on November 22nd, 1963. Everyone was there for the presidential motorcade. But it was a hat salesman by the name of Abraham Zapruder who got the real scoop. With his 8mm camera, in 6 seconds, he got the real story. Now, his footage would be under lock and key in a Time Life magazine vault for the next several years and wouldn't be seen until it was screened in the New Orleans courtroom. But it was that active citizen journalism that put a dent in the narrative that has continued throughout the next 60 years, that has called citizens to question the narratives that the government media complex puts out. On a lighter note, how many of you remember the Seinfeld episode, The Red Dot? Elaine gets George a job, and to repay her, George buys her this beautiful cashmere sweater. And he gets it marked down 70% because there's a little red dot on it. And he says, oh, she's never going to notice. She's never going to notice the red dot on the sleeve. So he brings it to her. She freaks out. She loves it. She can't believe he got her such an expensive gift present. And then Kramer rises up on the couch and goes, what's that red dot? Citizen journalists are always after the red dot. Going back to Dealey Plaza, the Warren Commission produced this beautiful 26-volume cashmere sweater about what really happened that day. But then, years later, a New Orleans district attorney said, what's that red dot there? It's all about finding the red dot. Andrew Breitbart, my mentor, who got me into this business. And I was the last to see him alive the night that he died. He would always say, narrative is everything. Always be suspicious of the narrative that's being repeated ad nauseam. Now, in his time, it was the Tea Party. The Tea Party is racist. The Tea Party is violent. Before there was MAGA, there was the Tea Party. I was with Andrew Breitbart down in Palm Springs, over in Palm Springs, in 2011. This was 2 weeks after Jared Luffner had shot Gabby Giffords in Tucson. And the media drumbeat, the narrative was, oh, racist Tea Party rhetoric motivated Jared Luffner. Turned out he was a communist, he was a Democrat, he had actually voted for Gabby Giffords. He was not a conservative, he was not a Tea Partier. But they said it enough times that it became true. Now I happened to go down to a rally in Palm Springs where this was just after the Citizens United ruling, and there was this all-white rally of left-wingers organized by the group Common Cause. The Koch brothers were in town and they were staying in a hotel, so Common Cause had organized all these left-wing ralliers to yell at the building over Citizens United. And I show up, and who do I see but Andrew Breitbart on rollerblades, trolling everyone, inviting them all to Applebee's, getting yelled at. And then I was wearing an Obama t-shirt because I was undercover. I had an idea, and I had a handheld camcorder. This was back in the day where you could use a handheld camcorder in a friendly face and elicit people. I was not even using ones that didn't cameras. And I went up to people and I said, what do we do with Clarence Thomas after we impeach him? Every single response had a recurrent motif. Ropes and nooses. String him up. Put him back in the field. Torture him. String Jenny up too. Hang him. I found in 2 hours at one left-wing rally in California everything that the Democrat media complex had been trying for 2 years to find on the Tea Party failed. That is the red dot in the narrative. Now, first while I had gotten to become friends with James O'Keefe. A mutual acquaintance had sent James O'Keefe the trailer for my thesis film. I went to film school, and James was very impressed. And with the production value, he reached out to me. He told me some of his ideas. One of them was from Hannah Giles, a 20-year-old girl out of Miami who had thought, what if I pretend to be a prostitute and go into Acorn offices saying that I want housing help setting up a brothel for 14-year-old El Salvadoran sex slaves. She came to James O'Keefe with that idea, and he said, oh, I can be the pimp. So James and Hannah go into Acorn offices across the country, San Bernardino, Los Angeles, Baltimore, DC, everywhere. And they all get this tape of the Acorn workers saying, yeah, so the sex slaves, you want to list them as dependents on your application form. And don't say prostitution, say performing arts. That videotape, now at the time, that videotape of President Obama was in his first year of office. He had been a previous attorney for Acorn back in the day. And Acorn had done a lot to help get him elected. He was forced, with a Democrat majority in Congress, he was forced by the power of videotapes to sign legislation defunding his former client Acorn. That is the power of videotape. Oh, Acorn, but yeah, Acorn is the Association for Community Organizations for Reform Now. Basically, it was a left-wing agitprop group that was partially responsible for the housing meltdown because they were pressuring banks to give subprime mortgages to unqualified borrowers that helped sink the housing market. also were suspected of doing a lot of illegal election rigging for Obama. So they came out of that whole Chicago swamp of community organizations. Now, fast forward to 2016. Like I said, there was the Tea Party, and then there was that was of course racist 10 years ago, and according to the Democrat media complex, and then you had the Trump supporters. And they, of course, the media said they're racist, they're violent, enough times. They had this narrative that in the 2016, during the 2016 run up to the election, that all of these people were getting beat up, this violence was just happening at Trump rallies, right? You guys remember this? A little before your time. You know, there was always a story, oh, a black guy was beat up at a Trump rally, or a 69-year-old woman with COPD was cold-cocked at a Trump rally, blah, 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 blah. That was the cashmere, beautiful cashmere sweater that the mainstream media had picked and sold to the public. We wondered what the red dot on the sweater was. So I happened to be in Wisconsin for Project Veritas. I was working for Project Veritas, and I was there investigating a lead that turned out not to be so, about that knock and drag was happening, where they were bribing people to go to the polls and vote. We had a tip about that. Turned out, you know, so I infiltrated about half a dozen left-wing organizations in Wisconsin. I did more campaigning for Hillary Clinton in the state of Wisconsin than Hillary Clinton. She did not set foot in that state once, because she thought she had it all locked up. Wisconsin hadn't gone blue since, what's his name? Or before Dukakis, even. Since '86. Who was '86 again? Anyway, Wisconsin had not gone blue since then. So I infiltrated half a dozen left-wing groups. I was pretending to be this, my name is Steve Packard, and I was a consultant for a consulting firm, and we had this very wealthy left-wing philanthropist client who had this brilliant idea. He hated voter ID. He had this brilliant idea how to create shell companies so he could employ illegal immigrants, issue them employer-issued IDs that they could take to the polls and then use to vote. This was all made up in my head. This was my, see, in order to assess corruptibility, you have to self-incriminate. And so I pitched it to a number of people, you know, that I was busing around inner city Milwaukee with, and to see who would take the bait. And one guy that I talked with at a bar, the SEIU, after a day of the primary election day in Wisconsin, 2016 primary day, and I was invited by the SEIU that I had been bussing around with all day to go to this primary viewing party. At that party, I run into Scott Fogel, and I tell him about my client. My client has this idea he has a lot of money, he knows how to do it. And Scott Fogel tells me, oh, that's brilliant, but you don't want to use buses because they're too easy to trace. You don't want to use rental cars because they don't have Wisconsin license plates. You want to use used auction cars. He starts giving me all this advice on how my client, my fictitious client, can get away with massive voter. Oh, and you want to expand it to a bigger scale. Don't just do it in Wisconsin, do it in Indiana, do it in Pennsylvania, do it in Michigan. and then he says, oh, and by the way, I know who your client is. Well, who do you think my client is? He says, well, Bob Creamer comes up with a lot of this stuff. I'm like, really? What kind of stuff? And he's like, well, do you remember that black guy who got beat up at the Scott Walker rally? Or got roughed up at the Scott Walker rally back in January? I was like, yeah, sure, I remember him. He's like, that was us. Turns out these people getting beat up at Trump rallies were being trained by Scott Fogel and under Bob Creamer, who Scott Fogel thought was my client at first. And who was paying for it? Hillary Clinton. So we are, look, we're not the Washington Post, okay? We're actual journalists, okay? We don't just put in print. We heard it from a friend who heard it from a friend who heard it from another, that Trump is a Russian stooge. No, take our word. No, we have to, just because some guy in a bar in Milwaukee told me this, and told me that he works for Bob Kramer and Hillary Clinton, doesn't make it so. We have to actually corroborate it, okay? So we wanted to get in front of Bob Kramer. So to corroborate everything that Scott Vogel told me. So I need to cast someone to play this wealthy philanthropist client, right? Who can hopefully, through Scott Vogel, get a meeting with Bob Kramer. So we cast Dan Sandini, one of my old friends at Breitbart, an older guy, and he plays. I reach out to Scott Vogel and I say, Scott, thank you for all that advice you gave me on how my client can pull off this massive voter fraud scheme. My client would like to meet your Bob Kramer. Can we arrange a meeting? Scott Vogel said yes. So we have Dan Sandini go to Washington, D.C. to meet with Bob Kramer, who was the top advisor to the Hillary Clinton campaign at the time. He's also married to Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky of Illinois. And my Charles Roth, who was the wealthy philanthropist, meets with Bob Kramer and says, I'm prepared to donate and give a large sum of money to your efforts, but I'm looking for someone who has the cojones that I have, who really is not afraid of even bending the law or bending, ethics. And so we start this 6-month friendship with Bob Kramer through the Hillary Clinton campaign. And to corroborate everything that Scott Vogel told me about how Scott Vogel told me a lot of things. He says, make no mistake, we have mentally ill people that we hire to do crazy stuff. He said, we get homeless people, we pay off homeless people to go to these events and stir up, to start problems. But we still have to make sure, can we corroborate that Hillary Clinton knows about this? Because we don't want to do it by association stories. So, we need to get in there. We cast Charles Roth to play the philanthropist client. What if Charles Roth has a niece who's in college, but she's off for the summer and she wants to do some interning, get involved? So our Charles Roth says to Bob Kramer, hey, I have a niece, she's off for the summer, and she would like to get involved, in what you guys are in. Bob says, oh sure, she can intern for me. So we cast Allison Moss, Project Veritas undercover journalist, to go in as my client's niece. So she's actually in on the meetings in Washington, D.C. with Bob Kramer and the Democracy Partners staff, and getting them on tape saying, yeah, we were going to do the Donald Duck, because they were sending Donald Duck to Trump press conferences to provoke and all that. So saying things like, yeah, we did the Donald Duck thing, but we were going to get rid of it, but Hillary really wanted us to do it, so Hillary wants ducks on the ground. By God, there will be ducks on the ground. So it turns out, yes, Hillary Clinton knew what they were doing. She was micromanaging what they were doing. And Allison Moss asked Bob in his office, how close are you? How close are you with the campaign? He says the campaign's fully in. Everything you do is with the campaign's knowledge. So at one point, Bob Kramer invites Allison Moss to go to the White House to meet President Obama with him. Turns out Bob Kramer had been a guest at the White House about 300 times over the Obama presidency. Allison Moss cannot enter. We learned the hard way in 2010 in New Orleans that you cannot enter federal property under false pretenses. So Allison Moss had to get sick and find an excuse not to go to the White House. That, of course, got Bob starting to go, wait, why does she not want to go to the White House? President. So that's when we had to pull out, but by that time, we had everything we needed. We had the scheme, we had Scott Vogel telling me into my button camera, not realizing he was eventually going to be speaking to millions of people behind that button camera 6 months later. that the Hillary Clinton campaign was training and funding what they called bird doggers to go to Trump rallies and incite violence. He released the tapes on October 19th, 2016. Later that night is the debate between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. Donald Trump brings up the clips that just came out. I was wondering what happened at my Chicago rally, because remember he had to shut down his Chicago rally because Scott Vogel and Bob Kramer sent in their agitators to incite violence and make it look like it was Trump supporters. That was the narrative. That was we found the red dot there. Trump and Hillary had nothing on the debate stage. Says you sent those people there. She had nothing to say. Front page of the New York Times, well, twice that week was front page, upper half of the New York Times front page was the image of Scott Vogel talking to me, taking through my button camera in that bar of water. Anderson Cooper had a panel discussing. This was a story so big that the mainstream media they were forced to cover. Now I am told by my sources in Wisconsin that every single election day since the 80s, there have been buses coming out of Chicago doing weird things, going door to door, going to all the polling places. On election day 2016 in Wisconsin, where Hillary Clinton did not feel a need to set foot in once, the town was dead. It was only Wisconsin voters going to the Wisconsin polls. There were no buses coming out of Chicago. And what happened? Wisconsin went for Trump, went red for the first time since 1986. And it was at that moment on election night, because let's remember, we all started going into election evening, okay, it's gonna be Hillary, it's gonna be Hillary. Whoa. What just happened in Wisconsin? So, I'm told that by sources that without that videotape, Bob Kramer, who had been running the Chicago machine, the Chicago outfit, that had been running Wisconsin politics since the 1980s, had been driven out of the state by those videotapes. That is the power of videotape. That is the kind of work that we did at Project Veritas. It was the undercover journalists who were brave enough to go into the field with hidden cameras. It's a superpower. We got stories that the mainstream media could not and would not get, didn't even want to get. But didn't even have, even if they wanted it, they didn't have the tools, the undercover cameras, and the bravery to walk through walls and be someone else and enter the smoke-filled back rooms and find out what public figures really were up to and what they really thought. I see some hands, so I'm going to go ahead and make you.
So, are you going to do the same thing in 2024? Because obviously 2020 wasn't very successful.
No. Well, we'd love to. I mean, there's no Project Veritas now, unfortunately.
What happened to James?
Okay. Well, James O'Keefe, and I say this as someone who was very close with James O'Keefe. There's no one who's been more loyal to James O'Keefe, who's not blood related to him than me. Since 2009. 2009, ever since James sent me down to Huntington Beach to shoot interstitial footage of Hannah Giles dressed as a prostitute for the Acorn videos. I've been working with James O'Keefe when I was at Breitbart. I was working with James O'Keefe. Now, Andrew used to warn me about, Breitbart used to warn me about the yes men that James surrounded himself with.
Need your microphone closer.
Oh.
Can't hear you.
So Andrew Breitbart
There you go.
Andrew Breitbart used to warn me about the yes men, the sycophants, the clout chasers, the claimers that James would, had a tendency to surround himself with, and it would insulate people like Andrew Breitbart, people who actually loved and cared about James, who were willing to tell him things he didn't want to hear but needed to hear, and that pushed pushed out people who actually cared about it. That tendency caught up to James. What happened in earlier this year, we were a 501c3, which is a donor-funded 501c3 nonprofit. We're subject to IRS regulation and oversight. There had been a pattern of behavior by James, both financially and interpersonally, that the board needed to intervene and talk with him about. No one wanted him gone. No one on the board wanted him gone. No one on the staff wanted him gone. We all loved him, and we wanted to continue. Everyone wanted to continue the mission. But even in a company that made a name for itself, holding power, the powers that be, holding power accountable, the powers inside that company sometimes need to be held accountable as well. And there was a pattern of behavior with regard to spending and employee treatment that the board members who were unpaid, but they're personally liable for what happens in a 501c3 that they're operating, they are obligated to address. So there was a board meeting on February 6th, earlier this year, and this was preceded by a development meeting earlier that week. There was a big blow up. James fired the CFO because the CFO was bringing up this pattern of spending donor money on personal allurement. And he said, look, James, we have the IRS briefing up next. We can't spend money like this. We can't have continuing to use a credit card on personal allurement and then having to pay back the company. The IRS will look for any excuse to shut us down. James fired the CFO. And that's when the board had to step in because they said, wait, we appointed the CFO. The CFO is a board appointed position. The CEO cannot fire the CFO. So they stepped in and said, James, you can't do that. And also, by that time, the board had summoned a whole number of employees who had felt abused and mistreated by James to testify. And they had been afraid to go to HR. They had been afraid to talk to James himself because of potential retaliation. So in order for them to testify, the board had to suspend James's ability to hire and fire temporarily. And they also, to do an internal audit and preempt an IRS audit, they had to temporarily suspend his company credit card. It was all temporary, and it was all gonna be handled internally. Everyone wanted James to stay, remain the leader, but someone leaked to the press, I say leaked because it wasn't true, that James had been ousted. James, it created a groundswell of, a Twitter mob with pitchforks saying, oh my God, James O'Keefe has been ousted. Clearly the deep state, clearly Pfizer or whomever has co-opted Project Veritas and forced James out. It was not true. But James embraced that and rode that wave and formed his own organization to compete with Project Veritas, just frankly, apparently because he just simply didn't want to be told by the board there are limitations to what you can do as a CEO. I could get way more into the weeds, but
So where is it now?
Yeah.
We need to conclude it now.
Okay.
Where is it now? I mean, what's the next for Project Veritas?
Well-
Because all like Project Veritas.
yeah, well, Project Veritas is done. So there's a diaspora of journalists and producers and editors who formerly worked at Project Veritas. And I encourage you to follow them individually. James Lalino, who was the senior investigative reporter at Project Veritas, one of my, who I mentored and who was one of the fastest learners, most professional people I've ever worked with. Follow him on Twitter.
Can you spell his name, please, James what?
Yeah, Lalino, Lalino. Follow Arden Young. Arden Young as well. She was one of our undercover journalists
And she has just broken a number of big stories. Arden Young, ARDENYOUNG, follow her. She's broken some huge stories exposing Pornhub and MindGeek, the parent company MindGeek. She went on a date undercover and got a MindGeek guy talking about how they are not censoring child porn because of the profitability of it. Follow Gavin Elwes, ELWES. He was one of our cameramen, and he has a very active Twitter. Follow Alyssa Dean. She was one of our, she exposed, a year ago, exposed the Hobbs campaign and the Mark Kelly campaign. Yeah.
I hate to do
Oh,
this,
sure.
but instead of going through the names, maybe we can get a list of these names and we want to
That would be
know how
great,
to
yeah.
follow you
Yeah.
and things.
And
And let's take 3 more minutes to see if people have a question because we need to move on. I'm
Sure.
sorry to do this, but.
Yeah, I'll give up 5 minutes of my time. 'cause-
Okay, anybody wants to ask other questions instead of going through, yeah.
So this is kind of horrible stuff that we're hearing about, that if someone were to do what you do to the right, to the conservative, do you think that we have that kind of corruption on our side as well?
well, it depends on what you mean by the right. I mean,
Conservative politicians?
well, I can tell you that, we at Project Veritas, we've been battling the left for 14 years. That just happens to be, Democrat media complex, the hegemony that we've been up against, because we expose the sacred cows and the people that you're not supposed to expose, the people that the media protects. We have all gotten a front row seat the last 8 months to how there is now, when we started, it was the Wild West. During the Breitbart days, there was, there was no conservative ink. There was Fox News, there was Rush Limbaugh, but there was the internet, but there wasn't a Turning Point USA, there weren't conservative influencers, there wasn't, now that there is this ecosystem of conservative influencers, Charlie Kirk's, Jack Posobiec, Tim Pool, all these people. Look, human nature catches up with every phenomenon, with every human phenomenon. And so we at Project Veritas, when James left and, promoted this false narrative that he had been ousted, that that Pfizer had taken over the board of Project Veritas, bought them out, when none of that actually happened. It's amazing to see how many influencers bought it hook, line, and sinker because it was popular on the right. There's a cult of personality. When we started in 2009, the cult of personality was surrounding Obama. It was a left-wing phenomenon. The reason Project Veritas no longer exists now is because our donors and our followers were misled by the same type of cult of personality, except it was on the right. It didn't matter that the journalists at Project Veritas for the next 6 months without James continued to do the job, continued to get out story after story, exposing pedophiles, exposing groomers. What the right-wing influencers were saying is, well, where's James? Where's James? Where's James? Like, well, was this ever about the undercover content, or was it about the celebrity of our founder? So we're beginning to see on the right a lot of the same groupthink, the same cronyism, the same swampiness that we saw, that we don't have to deal with on the left for 14 years. So, and of course, if we're talking about Republicans, well, you know the answer to that question. James Comey is a Republican. All these terrible people who brought Trump down and Russiagate were Republicans. It's a uniparty. So, but to answer your question, yes, we got really a front row seat to the corruptibility of the right, of people, individuals on the right who are willing to believe lies because they're popular. Yes.
So is there any hope of getting, the election not stolen?
Well, it surely doesn't help to have Jenna Ellis, who had the receipts, now apologizing and saying that it was was all a mistake and she wouldn't have done it, you know, because, I mean, we need to ballot harvest. Republicans, you know, in the states where it's legal, there needs to be this is just my personal opinion, there needs to be a more coordinated ballot harvesting, and we need to do it shamelessly. The Democrats are doing it, why are we not doing it? That I think needs to happen, and, you know, and we need to, look, read the Navarro report, you know, watch 2,000 Mules, be aware and vigilant of how they did it last time. It worked last time, and one of the things that the left, you know, they go by Saul Alinsky's rules for radicals. Number 7 is a tactic that drags on too long becomes a drag. That is the one rule that they have lost sight of, because they're using the same exact tactics. In 2020, they used the same tactics. You know, Trump is a racist, Trump is violent, insurrection, that they were using, that we exposed them on, that was fraudulent. So they tend to replay the same tactics. If it worked, why change it? They're not very creative people anymore. The left, they're not very imaginative anymore. So you saw what they did in 2020. Be watching for that again.
All right. I want to
There's so many stories to uncover, and we would like to have your game here so we can hear them more. And maybe we can also be trained. How do we know? You know, how do you do your work? How can we, as layperson, understand what is true, what is not the right information? How can we investigate things and help people like you to bring these stories to life?
How do we become undercover journalists?
Well,
Okay, 2 more minutes. Okay, here we go, and then we need to move. Okay, come on.
Well, go to lawmate.com. There's lawmate.com, LAWMATE. There are a lot of cameras that you can, undercover cameras that you can buy. And wear them. There's purse cameras, there's button cameras, there's coffee cup cameras, there's water bottle cameras, and you can drink the water after while you're filming. And there's key fob cameras. So there's notebook cameras. Buy them and then just start carrying them around with you, wearing them. If you're behind enemy lines, if you're around, you know, if you're in front of anything, you're seeing or hearing anything that you believe that the public has a right to see and hear.
All right, thank you so much. Okay, thank you so much, Christian. Let's do the next. Jack, I hope you have the energy here. Jack Fernandez was born in San Diego to an immigrant father who fled civil war and a mother with a neurodegenerative disease. Jack stacked